Senior researcher at Corruption Watch, Melusi Ncala, believes that political party alignment is coming to an end in South Africa. In his opinion piece, Ncala says in the 2024 elections, we're likely going to see independent candidates competing without the backing of political parties. He joins us now to elaborate more on this writing. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. So you argue that you're dabbling in the politics of tomorrow's government, speaking about a number of hot topics, including international relations, identity politics, and, of course, corruption. But more interestingly, you note that South Africans, we are complicit in the country's many problems. How so?
Good afternoon, Dudu, and thank you for having me here today. So the nub of the argument that I'm making is that often as social justice, anti-corruption activists, we lament that people in power, particularly politicians, need to have integrity, which is something that I wholeheartedly agree with. And but now, this time around, I was flipping the question, directing it to us as ordinary people to say, how liable are we for the type of governments that we have, the type of people that we actually have put into power? And it's a question that speaks to our lack of integrity as a people, because we keep on voting for the same people, same politicians, knowing very well that in some instances they are embroiled in corruption scandals. We have service delivery issues as a country. And so then why do we keep on doing this to ourselves?
You ask why we keep doing this to ourselves, but you also acknowledge that even though it's not acceptable, it's understandable that we find ourselves in the cesspool and at the mercy of political scavengers. Who are political scavengers? What are political scavengers?
I say it's understandable because, for quite a long time, we have been told that the 94 project was about political freedom, and it is up to today's youth and the population, or citizens rather, to fight for economic emancipation. And this is something that we've bought into for quite some time, and hence people would continuously vote for a political party like the African National Congress, for example, on the belief that even though some of the top politicians are embroiled in corruption scandals, that, the party will ultimately change their lives. But we don't see this happening. For example, the Democratic Alliance, even though it governs the Western Cape, it finds itself entrenching pre-94 ways of doing things, policies, for example, and it calls it redress. But meanwhile, you find that the black people in the Western Cape are suffering. So these are the type of things that I'm highlighting and bringing to our attention, to say that we buy into these narratives because we hold hope, and there's nothing wrong with that in principle. But when promises have been broken, we really need to change our ways.
I'd like for us to expand on that, because there are a myriad of narratives in the country, and it would appear from the outside looking in that they remain just narratives, because if you take a look at the quality of life of the majority of people, nothing has changed. And so who is responsible for bringing about this tangible change that people desperately need?
I mean, one of the arguments that I make is that, we've gone through a system of feudalism type governance as the human race, and this was followed mainly by capitalism. And this is where we find ourselves. I mean, when you look at the South African case study, we're currently adhering largely to a neoliberal economic structure. Hence, we're dealing with issues of austerity. And what does that mean ultimately? Is that issues relating to social welfare, which in effect affects the majority black, those are often overlooked. And so when we're talking about, people not being given social grants, or people opposing NHI, for example, or when people are opposing the increase of social grants, these are the black majority that suffer, and it's often the government of the day that ultimately endorses those type of policies. The ANC has a history of endorsing those policies, and the DA often makes arguments for those policies.
And so with the ever-changing electoral landscape in the country, what hope is there in individuals, for instance?
So what we have seen at least is that grassroots communities, activists, people are now aligning themselves to common values. Ordinary people have common interests that they rally behind. It's no longer of the politics of who's popular or a so-called political party that is going to rescue you from your misery. People are realizing that it's up to them. Hence, people in some communities, you'll find people filling up potholes. They take that initiative and make it their own. In some communities, people are planting community gardens. So it's an indication that people are realizing that there are more important things that are intrinsically important to them as a people, as a community, that matters. And that's the type of thing that we're going to see happening in future elections. I'm not saying that necessarily there's going to be a ground change, a huge fundamental change in 2024, but because the Constitutional Court has now ruled on the fact that we should have independent candidates, what will hopefully happen is that we'll now see people that actually take the interest of the ordinary citizens at heart, and these are the people that will be propelled into positions of power.
Okay. Melusi Ncala, thank you very much for your time. He's with Corruption Watch.